Welcome to Finance with Factor,
Oops, apparently we're already recording, so here we go.
a place you can come to laugh and learn from local experts who love to discuss everything related to the world of real estate.
Weird passion. It's one that I actually share a little bit, so it makes me a weirdo with you.
Each week, we'll cover a unique topic
Let's talk about condos.
to help you understand the mortgage industry, navigate the home buying process, and grow your business while maintaining a slice of sanity.
Okay, fine. I've been confused by a lot of things over the past few years.
Now that he's climbed safely atop his soapbox, here's your host, a senior loan officer with Movement Mortgage, Jason Factor.
Couldn't be anything more appropriate than being delayed because IT had to get you into the link.
Hey, you can't be too careful. Every link could lead you down a rabbit hole for sure.
It's exactly what we're here to talk about.
I know. There's been a lot of rabbit holes this week that have been coming through our doors. So for sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the holidays are sort of a time for banking security, internet security, cybersecurity, however you want to call it, whatever you want to call it. If there is a time of year that you're going to be duped into doing something you probably shouldn't click on, it's probably around this time of year.
100%. And we just heard a statistic this morning that check fraud is up 385% since the pandemic.
Check fraud?
Yes.
What's check fraud?
So check fraud is if you mail your check someplace or you give a check to somebody, you're exposing your account number. And
Sure.
Mail is being stolen, checks are being washed. An example that I have is someone who wrote a check for $13, somebody stole the check, washed it. So check washing is they use a chemical to change the name and the written amount, and they're able to match somewhat the signature on there. And they changed the payee and the dollar amount from $13 to $13,000. Yeah. So, and thankfully it was caught, but if it hadn't been and they had that much money in an account, they're out that money.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Once it's gone, it's kind of gone.
Yeah.
There's no getting it back.
No. Well, sometimes there is. And so if you have a good relationship where you do your banking, then they should be helping you with these things. The fraud,
Correct.
People are embarrassed to file a police report. They don't think it's going to do any good. But you always start with that. You never know. But if you have a good relationship with where you do your business, they should be helping you to recoup this money because it's really not your fault somebody stole it.
No, and a lot of it gets insured.
Yes.
When you're working with a credible lender, bank,
Yeah.
a lot of that is insured. So I shouldn't say you don't get it back, but there are ways to get it back if you report it. But that's sort of what we're here to talk about. So I should introduce the person I'm speaking with. Jane Berry is with South Shore Bank. What is your exact title? How long have you been there? Tell people a little bit about South Shore.
So my bank, I've been with South Shore Bank for 5 years. My position here is banking center officer. I manage the Hanover branch here in Previty's Marketplace. And we're a community bank. So it's great to be in a community bank because we're not beholden to shareholders. We are there for our customers and everything's local. Our lenders are local. Our servicing area is local. So
Our friends are local.
Our friends are local.
Which is how I know Jane through the Chamber of Commerce here in Hanover.
Yeah.
And I know recently you were doing a presentation on banking security, and I was picking your brain on it.
Yes.
And I said, this would be an awesome topic to bring. I've done a variety of security shows in the past that people can certainly look up in the library. But I really liked some of the perspective that you brought. And so I wanted to pick your brain on how'd the class go?
Absolutely. Happy to do it. So the class that Jason's referring to, we did at the Hanover Council on Aging, where we had about 10 individuals attend. It was great. It was great because that's the population that's the most vulnerable right now. And some of the people that were there shared with us that either they have somebody's called them and attempted to scam them out of money, or they have friends and family that do it. Um, and I just talking about it is important because a lot of people won't talk about it. If they feel
Yep.
ashamed if they get taken advantage of, they won't tell a family member. They like to hide it, especially in that age group, because they want to remain independent. They're afraid they're going to lose their independence, that their family's going to take over their finances, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
No, and it can happen to people at any age. I mean,
Yeah.
the real estate transaction in general tends to be a very highly targeted transaction, which is why it's always such a relevant topic.
Sure.
And there are a number of ways to do it, and people are getting more and more sophisticated
Yes.
with the layers and levels of fraud out there.
Yeah.
What were some of the stories that you heard that stuck out as people were sharing stories at
Um,
the event?
the phone calls, how they
Yep.
get a lot of phone calls. They get a lot of spam calls. They get a lot of phone calls for donations. They seem to find a way to tug at their heartstrings to make them be aware of it, so that um, they aren't thinking it could be fraud. They could be making a donation that now gives out their credit card or debit card information to someone that they just go shopping with it. One of the people that shared a story was their sister got a phone call, and they tried to tell her that it was a scam, and not to believe it. And this woman said, my sister is a very intelligent person. I don't understand how she fell for it. But they tug at your heartstrings. They get you when you're vulnerable, and they just know the right thing to say that makes all common sense go out the window.
Well, so this is a terrifying one. So I'm literally I just downloaded my certificate of completion for my billion hours of compliance training that I've just finished so that I can refile for all my state licenses.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the stories that people were telling was some of the AI uses
Mm-hmm.
in fraud. So some of these calls, there was a story of a guy in the class that had heard or had this happen to him, where he gets a call and it says, or no, he got a call and it was his daughter's voice
Yeah.
saying that she had been in a car accident and that she needed, don't tell anyone, it's fine, I'm okay, but come to this address and bring some funds, like whatever it was. I forget the exact story, but basically you can hear it's a police officer and then his daughter's voice saying, "It's okay, Dad, I'm okay," and his daughter speaks to him. He was ready to go to the ATM and go get cash and go to this location and bail his daughter out of jail for this no-fault car accident where his daughter had told him that that she was okay and she didn't need to go to the hospital or anything. Just come to this location and the police officer would release her. The only reason he didn't was because he had the phone tracking thing on. He saw that his daughter was nowhere near that location, and his
Yeah.
uncle had called him like moments before and said that he was on the phone with her. And he called the uncle, and the uncle's like, "What are you talking about? I was just talking to her. She's nowhere over there." And so they caught it that way. But the layer and sophistication of these can get anyone.
Yeah, I agree. And you have to be careful when you answer the phone now, because AI is what's happening. My husband thought he'd be funny and play with them, and I disconnected the phone. I said, "You just gave them
Your voice.
so much of your voice
Yep.
in how you say words." My son is in the Army, and in order to make sure that we're protected and my in-laws are protected, because my father-in-law did get one of those grandparent scams calls, but he knew enough that it wasn't my son. But we created a safe word
Mm-hmm.
so that if it is AI, the AI person doesn't know the safe word. So
Super smart.
yeah, we shared that information at the Council on Aging, and every one of them thought that was a great idea, and they were going to do that because they have grandchildren who also are falling victim to scams. There's a babysitter scam out there where they will connect with someone who's looking for a babysitting job, and send the money, and the whole thing, and next thing you know, they're out money. And
Well, and I have young kids. Roblox is a big game that they play, which is an open AI. It's an open platform where pretty much anyone can create games, go on there. and it's just a magnet for potential issues. And we've seen it where they're on there, and we've disabled every chat feature. We've limited the screen time. We supervise it pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
But, the kids are smart and they get around stuff. And so, having things like that, I think is really important. What were some of the other tips that you provided for as part of this training in terms of security? And what are some of the, outside of like phone calls, solicitations, what are some of the things specific to lending and banking that you try to advise your clients and people in this seminar to be mindful of?
Sure. So, a lot of people are concerned with online banking, but that's actually the safest thing they could do. So we recommend e-statements instead of getting paper statements, because there's a period during the year when people are expecting tax refunds. That's the biggest time of year your bank statements are stolen.
Yep.
And what's on your bank statements? Pictures of images of your checks. So we recommend e-statements. We recommend making sure you have a good security word that nobody else knows. Don't share your account number with anybody. Use a credit card when you're shopping online instead of debit cards, because when you use your debit card, you expose your entire account online.
Yep.
Same thing could happen with a credit card, but it's not as painful. For lending, always make sure that you're speaking with the people that you're borrowing money with. If everything's communicating through email, always check to make sure the email is coming from where it's supposed to come from. If you weren't expecting it, call that person and make sure they sent it. If you get a phone call from your bank that says there's fraud, but you don't recognize the phone number, if you don't feel comfortable with following the steps they're asking you to do over the phone, hang up and then call the bank that you do business with at the phone number that you value and trust, so that you can connect with them, because it could be a scammer that has spoofed the phone number.
Yeah, so specifically in the real estate transaction, there are a couple of tips that I would add to that, or add to what Jane is saying. For starters, I'm actually sitting here. Hold on one second. I'm going to fold this up as I'm at the table here. I took my first paper application in many years
Wow.
the other day.
That's a shocker.
The person was just too busy to do it online, and I said, let's do it right now over the phone. I pulled a piece of scrap paper out of my notebook, and I wrote down a paper application that I will now ceremoniously throw into the shredder while we are here on this call.
Now you froze.
Sorry about that. I'm going to rejoin my own session here. Let's see how this works.
That's so funny.
So that was a disaster. For those who are like, what happened to that big momentary pause there? I ran the shredder as a big show-off moment to say that I was being secure with our banking, and then I short-circuited our power and had to rejoin this little session. So apologize for the cutout there, or if the audio gets a little awkward, but that's how we roll here on this podcast. It just sort of goes as it is. But to your point of what we were talking about, doing things online is more secure. And I know it feels good and safe to do things in person, to send bank statements instead of linking accounts. But for example, when we take our mortgage application, we have a software program where you can link the bank accounts. And people always feel a little sketched out by linking a bank account because you have to put in passwords and all that. It's the exact same software that the IRS uses when they refund your money or take your money when you file taxes. Yep. But what it does for us is it allows us to link to that bank account so we can pull a certified bank statement for you so that you're not sending stuff over your own servers, back and forth, uploading documents, downloading them onto your PC. Again, all of those, every time you take a step, it leaves a footprint. And that footprint becomes traceable and accessible to the people that are trying to get at your information. So the less footprints you can make, the less traceable you become.
Yeah, no, I agree completely, because when I ask for bank statements, I send an encrypted email to people first. I am blown away with how quickly they're sending me things not using the encrypted email, because they assume that the firewall at the bank will protect what they've attached. But All they have to do is have my email address incorrect. Anything could happen. And like you said, you could leave a footprint. So if you're being asked to send documents, make sure that you're being given the secured way to send it. And if you're not, don't send it because
And there are a number of secure ways to do it. And to Jane's point, I mean, our bank has a ton of, and I'm sure Jane does too, a ton of security measures, like the one where she couldn't click on the link to join the, the podcast and record, because like we can't plug a USB, like all of our computers are all gummed up. We can't plug anything into our computers because you can't put a thumb drive into our computers.
yeah.
So some other things that I would say in terms of recommendations, and I think you made a really good point about calling the number you trust. Never, ever, ever call the email or the number in the email. What I always recommend people do, and again, in real estate, it's usually the attorneys that get targeted. It's not necessarily the bank. The banks, like I said, they certainly do get targeted, but if you're targeting a bank, you're going after like the big stuff. So you're not always going after the individual transactions. They will try to get the bank to wire funds to places that aren't supposed to be going. And so like what they generally do is they log into the attorney's email or watch the server on the attorney's side. And then when it comes time to wire instructions, they will send out wiring instructions that are not correct. So what I always recommend people do is literally in your phone, when you have an attorney that you're working with, and get an actual person, not just a company name or anything like that, but save their email and their phone number to your phone. And then that way, when you get that email, call and double authenticate. If Jane is sending you instructions that sound a little fishy, call and authenticate.
No, I agree completely. And 90% of the attorneys out there now, when they do send email instructions for closings, at the bottom, there's a disclaimer. If that disclaimer isn't there, call them directly. And granted, most often that attorney is representing the bank, but you still have the right to ask them, how am I going to know? How do you protect this? How do I know you're going to be sending me the correct information? When a bank brings on an attorney, they have to have insurance against cyber fraud as part of the closing attorneys. That's why a lot of banks have closed attorney lists, because they don't want to open up the fraud the way it is. So make sure when you're working with an attorney on a real estate transaction that you have asked the right questions. Just because you're not paying the bill, well, you are because in your closing costs, but make sure you ask. You have every right to ask to protect yourself.
The other thing I would recommend people do is go to optoutprescreen.com. For those of you who aren't aware, if you're a realtor, an attorney, a lender, a home buyer listening to this, you should absolutely pull out your phone, your computer, go to optoutprescreen.com. This is the one safe place where you can federally put yourself on the do not call list.
Yep.
So when someone pulls credit, there are these things called trigger leads. And I've heard some really horrifying stories about again, we talk about leaving a footprint and the access into that footprint. So when Jane pulls credit for a potential client, or when I pull credit for a potential client, our sites are secure. We are not allowed to give out your information. So like, I'll give you an example. When Mortgage Network was purchased by Movement Mortgage, I had people in transaction that I had to actually reapply. And I was like, I'm really sorry. I know this is a pain, but I need you to re-upload all your bank statements, pay stubs, W-2s. And they're like, I already sent it to you. And I'm like, I know, but it's private information. And even though it's the exact same company, I am not allowed to port it over. So when Jane pulls credit, I've heard stories of people getting as many as 250 calls, texts, and emails immediately upon putting in the application. And that makes Jane look like she's selling your information. I can assure you, we are not giving away your private information. What's happening is what's called a trigger lead. So back when, do you remember during COVID when Experian and Equifax got hacked?
Yes, absolutely.
So when they got hacked, if Jane was to give out, if that shredding hadn't gone through, it short-circuited this entire thing. If that shredding hadn't gone through and someone took one piece of private information, that's a $5,000 fine to me and my bank. So when Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, when these big places get hacked, you can imagine how big the fines become when millions of people are exposed. So they fall under the CFPB, and banking regulations. They go to Congress and they say, you can't fine us like a bank because we're not banks. We're not financial institutions. We don't fall under your purview. We're aggregate marketing sites that provide financial information to banks, but we're not a bank. And for whatever reason, the lobbyists won and Congress bought it. And as a result, they become aggregate marketing sites that can now sell your data. So if Jane wanted to, she could very literally buy leads from the credit bureaus. So she could say, anytime someone in Hanover pulls credit of 800 plus and income of X for a mortgage, I would like that information. And then she can call them. I want to see if I can find the quote from the compliance class because I actually wrote it down. It was so good. And of course, I can't because that's how this podcast goes. But it was the compliance class. He said, you either earn your leads from honesty, integrity, and referrals, or if you can't do that, you buy them.
Yeah.
And that's what this is, right? So like banks not like you that you mentioned right off the top. You work in a community bank that builds relationships with clients. They're not. You're getting leads from people walking in the door, and relationships around town. You're not buying those leads. So I heard this story of a client. You talk about, again, to get back to the topic of saving the information. Took the mortgage application, got one of these trigger lead calls, and the person misrepresented who they were and made it sound like they were calling from Jane's office. Just Jane as an example. This did not happen to Jane, to be clear. Made it sound like they were calling from Jane's office and said, come drop off the documents. They didn't upload correctly. If you could bring them in, that would be great. Person didn't think anything of it. Comes, drops off the documents at the address provided, calls the lender back and says, I dropped everything off. And she's like, I never asked you to come drop anything off. I have them. I just pre-approved you.
Wow.
So again, like these solicitations, these sort of like misrepresentations, the simplest way to fix it is save the number. Yeah. Call us directly. Like we are real people. If you're working with a real lender, not like a big call center, you'll have an actual person. Mm-hmm. You know, I realize at Rocket Mortgage, you might not have an individual person, but when you work with a good local lender, a good local bank, you'll have a person.
Yeah, and that's very true. You always want to trust who you're working with. Don't be driven by rate. Just take a pause and do your research and really find out what else are you going to do for me? How are you going to hold my hand through this process when I do a mortgage? Because if I'm going to talk to you for 5 minutes and I'm going to spend time talking to 10 other people, that's not very trusting. It's not building the relationship. So, you know,
and the same would go, I imagine you guys do a lot of commercial lending. I'd imagine the same goes there. And that's, again, another place that's ripe with security concerns.
Yeah, big time. We have a lot of issues. We have a lot of business customers that are experiencing fraud. They're writing checks. Some of them still have to write checks. And thankfully, we have fraud protection for them. And it has saved them thousands of dollars because you have no idea where your check is going. If I receive a check from a business and I put it in my bank account here and my account gets compromised, now that business information is out there for the world to find. And it's happening.
And to your point earlier, we as small business owners, you know, I consider myself a small business owner, even though I do not own Movement Mortgage or my own business in any way, but self-proprietors is maybe the better term. Yeah. You tend to put yourself out there a lot. So if you're a realtor, you're on social media, your voice is out there, your information, your phone number, your email address, it's all out there. So it's not very difficult for a sophisticated operation to piece all that together and leverage you and your information that's very public to grab one or two pieces of private information and make some pretty scary leaps from there.
Yes, and they are scary. They are very scary. You know, you have a shredder in your office, and part of it's because of what you do. It's your home office, but everybody should have a shredder in their home to shred anything, even if it's a credit card application that's pre-approved, unsolicited mail. You never want to just toss that in the trash because if these scammers pay big money for that trash, and people go through the trash. There's a reason they call it dumpster diving, and they can steal your information right out of the trash. You think you're going to rip that up in teeny tiny pieces and they won't find it? They will. They'll piece it right back together. So have a shredder in your home. If you hear of a shred day and it's a reliable resource, Council on Aging has them, a lot of banks have them. Take your bag of stuff to the shred day and make sure it's destroyed. Never put something in a mailbox. Go inside the post office if you have to mail it. Every time I go to the post office locally, within 5 minutes after leaving there, I get a text. The package that you mailed, we can't deliver. I'm like, I just didn't mail a package. And I don't understand it. And one time it did happen and I had just mailed a package and I'm like, wait a minute. No, I'm not doing that because my husband went and did it. So some way, somehow, just walking into the post office triggers something on my phone. And I get that text every time. But
That's wild.
If you're not expecting it, don't answer it.
And again, like in our profession, at least my profession, that is a very difficult thing to do. I constantly get made fun of for the fact that I will pick up every single unknown call. Like it will say, like spam likely. And I'm like, I don't know this number. I have to answer it. What if it's a client? And I'm sure realtors feel the same way of just like, I have to answer it. Like it's an addiction that I just can't kick. But I do, because of the way that AI works, I am very careful about the way that I answer that call and leaving that pause at the beginning, letting them do the first to speak. And if it's not a person, like if it takes a second for it to click over, that's definitely a spam call.
Yeah.
The person that's calling me will immediately say, oh, hey, Jason, this is Jane. I got your number from so-and-so and I wanted to give you a call. So that's a very different call.
Yeah.
What are some other tips that you have, particularly around the banking relationship, that you would say would be important takeaways during this time when people are maybe depositing money, moving funds, making gifts?
Yeah. Don't get too busy to pay attention. That's the big thing, because it can happen without you even noticing it. Check your accounts daily. If you have access to online banking, check your accounts daily. The minute you notice something isn't right, call your bank. Fraudsters will start with a very small amount of money, and then they go in for the kill. You only have 90 days with which to verify information on your account. We've had to we can't do disputes after that time. So unfortunately, some people are out the money when they don't pay attention. If it's something that's outside the norm for your business, if you get a company that you used to be able to mail checks to and they say, you know what, we're only taking ACH, speak to your rep to make sure that that is in fact true. Make sure you have the correct information, because I know of 2 business customers that are out a lot of money because of that right now and still trying to help them pursue it. So if it's a sudden change in payment methods for your business, protect that. And talk to your bank about Positive Pay, other fraud protection services that you can have on your account. And if they don't offer it, you need to find some place that does. Working local, like Jason and I are both local, work with some place that's local, because guess what? They might call you before you know it is happening. That's a big deal. We do that often. We call businesses all the time. Did you know your account was overdrawn? It shouldn't be. What's going on? And next thing you know, there's an issue. But just be vigilant. Don't use your debit card unless you know where you're using it. Don't use it online. Never put your PIN number in a PIN pad unless it's at an ATM. When you go to a store to make a purchase, like Stop and Shop or Trader Joe's or any of those places, if you use your card and it wants your PIN, make that cashier cancel it and use the chip and make them use it as a credit. Don't be afraid to tell them to do that, because last year there was 2 stores down in Plymouth that somebody went into and put skimmers on all the PIN pads at all the registers. And that caused a lot of heartache for people. So jiggle it if you have to. If it doesn't look right, don't use it. And always never put your PIN number in when you're buying something at a store, ever.
And those are all really good tips. If you have specific questions, Jane mentioned bank locally. If you are on the South Shore, I encourage you to check out South Shore's location here in Hanover, South Shore Bank. Ask for Jane Barry. She's wonderful. If you're looking for a mortgage, I'd be happy to be a local rep. And Jane and I, have had the opportunity to team up on a few different occasions.
Yeah.
I'm a big proponent of, this sounds counterintuitive, where I mentioned that I'm sort of a sole proprietor in many ways, and that I only get paid on mortgages I close. But there are times when I say, I'm not the right fit. You should go talk to Jane for X, and vice versa. And I think that sort of, again, that personal relationship that you build with your clients, it goes a long way. So thank you, Jane, for always being a good representative of the industry, and for making time to come on here and put up with my nonsense when we go through power outages and share some great tips around the holidays. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. If anything we can do to help save people some heartache, happy to do it. And always a pleasure to collaborate with you. It's always good to be able to go back.
Totally agree. And I will see you very soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Finance with Factor. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Then if you really like us, open another podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or really wherever else you enjoy podcasts. Search Finance with Factor and do it again. The more places you like, share, and follow helps our ratings. But that can be our little secret. Have a question about today's episode or an idea for an upcoming episode? Post a comment. For more content, follow Jason Factor on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Finance with Factor. All content discussed on Finance with Factor is self-published by Jason Factor, Senior Loan Officer, NMLS number 1401985. All rates, guidelines, and advice shared on this episode is subject to change. To contact Jason directly or for a full set of disclosures, visit his website at jasonfactor.com.
Jason Factor, NMLS number 1401985. Movement Mortgage Supports Equal Housing Opportunity. NMLS number 39179. NMLS, consumeraccess.org.